No, we are not in China. And you've probably noticed that we're also not on London's famous tube line Victoria. But we are in a former British territory, because we are in Malta, where this unique wall is a symbol of the power struggle that Malta has been involved in since classical times, when it was fought over by the Carthaginians and Romans. Join us as we walk along this unique trail in Europe and learn about the extraordinary history of Malta's Great Wall, the Victoria Lines. To understand the construction of the Victoria Lines, you need to know that the seemingly small, insignificant island in the Mediterranean has played a central role in many conflicts since the Middle Ages. After being occupied by the Romans, Arabs, and Spanish, among others, the island came into the hands of the Knights Hospitaller in 1530, a Catholic military order founded in the 12th century to defend Jerusalem against Arabs. The order built and strengthened large fortresses on the island to protect it from Muslim conquest, for example, around the island's old Arab capital, Medina. After a brief period in none other than Napoleon Bonaparte's possession, Malta fell into British hands in 1800, where it suddenly found itself at the center of power again, this time through maritime trade, when the Suez Canal was opened in 1869. Malta became an important link in the trade route from Britain to India, and soon returned to the glory and prosperity that it had known during the time of the Knights. This prosperity naturally attracted jealous looks from surrounding countries, and the British soon began to think about strengthening the defenses of the island. The southeastern coast of the island, and especially the main harbor, had been well protected from Muslim raids by towers and forts since the time of the Knights Hospitaller, but at a time when not all European countries were favorably disposed towards the British. The important Royal Navy base lay dangerously open to attack from land. Therefore, even before the Suez Canal was completed, Colonel Sir William Jervois laid the foundations in 1866 for a British refortification of the coastal defense system that had fallen into disrepair since the time of the Order of Jerusalem. In retrospect, this was the starting signal for the construction of a unique military monument that the British would construct over the next 30 years in the form of a wall that effectively split the island in two. The wall's origins can also be traced back to those first medieval fortifications, when the Knights Hospitaller made efficient use of the island's geology by strategically building two sets of trenches along the major tectonic fault line that runs across the island. By closing these two locations along the fault line, the Knights controlled the two roads that provided access from north to south, and thereby created a strong defensive line on the island. These were later named the Naxar Gap and the Falka Gap, respectively. On the advice of General Sir John Adye, the British decided to further strengthen the Knights Hospitaller's natural defense line between 1872 and 1878 by building three forts at Bynema, Mosta, and Madliana. However, military engineers soon discovered weak spots in the defenses, and it was decided to strengthen the geological boundary along its entire length, starting with the construction of this almost 2-kilometer-long entrenchment at the Dwayjara Plateau in 1881. The original plans by William Jervois had been to build a ring of forts around the harbor area, but it was instead established that it was much cheaper to defend the strategically important eastern part of the island by fortifying the existing natural wall barrier, originally called the Northwest Front, which could be built for less than £200,000. Keen-eyed visitors to the Dwajdra Plateau will also notice that beneath these imposing walls are striking man-made caves in the rocks. The site is often called the Bingema Necropolis, and the caves are former tombs dating back to the Punic period and late antiquity. Today, this is one of the few sparsely inhabited parts of the island, but until the end of the Middle Ages, this region around the former capital Medina was the most densely populated part of the island, as manifest by the tombs and catacombs within the area. At some stage, these were later converted into living quarters for hermit monks or peasants. The British stone wall, which was built above and around the tombs of the Dwajdra Plateau, is relatively high, reaching a height of up to 8 meters, and really looks like part of China's famous Great Wall, although it did not serve as a model. Most parts of the Victoria lines are constructed as you can see above. An infantry wall of about 2 meters high with musketry loopholes, which reinforces the height of the natural cliff. The loopholes you see here were restored in 2001 using original stones found on site, and give a good idea of what large parts of the wall once have looked like in full regalia. As we continue along the Dwajdra line, we see that large parts of the defensive wall actually consist mainly of channels cut out of the rocks to reinforce the height of the cliffs. A relatively low wall was built on top of these cliffs, with a battery of guns placed at strategic points, so that the British armed forces created a defense that was difficult for enemy infantry to penetrate easily. The most notable artillery battery is Targa, situated a little further northwest of Mosta, was built in 1890, but never received its intended rifle, muzzle-loading 64-pounder artillery gun. When the Northwest Front was completed in 1899, it was given the name the Victoria Lines in honor of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, but they had a very short life. The reason is obvious. Just as cannons heralded the end of the Middle Ages, by the early 20th century, it was quickly becoming clear that a new military era was about to begin with the invention of the airplane, quickly rendering defenses such as the Northwest Front useless. After more than 30 years of construction, the Great Wall of Malta was decommissioned in 1907, with the exception of the forts of Maddalena and Bynema. The Victoria lines would never see war, even though strategically located Malta was once again the center of fighting in World War II and one of the most bombed places in Europe. The age of air warfare had begun, and although the British feared that they would soon lose the island and its important port, so close to Italy and far from home, their Royal Air Force and Navy did the impossible and managed to hold the island. Although the Axis powers had plans to invade Malta during the Second World War and had the Victoria lines drawn on maps as a defensive line, a land invasion never came about due to the brave air defense. Since then, the Special Wall, parts of which have experienced the Crusades, the British colonial period, and the German Luftwaffe bombardments, has lost its military function. But fortunately, many parts can now be admired and are even being restored, because the 12-kilometer-long wall is not only a unique military memorial, but nowadays above all a special hiking trail in the most natural and peaceful part of Malta. Enthusiasts can make it a 20-kilometer-long historical trek, and at Targa, they can even camp in and around the artillery battery. Anyone visiting Malta would definitely do well to stretch their legs and go on a historical discovery tour. Thanks for watching, and see you again in one of our next videos.